So we're taking a look at combination models for the Borak. Not the Rahi today, that would probably be a different video, but we're going to start with this one here. There are 4 of these guys, 2 for the original Borak from 2002, 2 for the Borakal, and I don't know any of their names. That said, we're going to start with this one here, just because, you got to start somewhere, and let's go ahead and get on into it. Make sure you're subscribed. That said, this one is pretty interesting. I think what LEGO was able to do with the Borak platform is pretty commendable here, because this model is kind of enormous, honestly. Like, compared to my head, it's at least 1.3 head sizes. I'm not going to use the metric system. That said, I think it's quite interesting what they do with both this version and the second version from 2002, where they actually pair a Krana down on the bottom of the model towards the waist, as well as actually having a Krana inside the model as well. Maybe they're making up for something in the future, which I'll talk about in a moment, but that said, it's generally a pretty interesting model, and I do quite like it. Color scheme wise, it's also quite pleasing in my opinion. This is a very nostalgic color scheme for me, but I also really like the earthy tones here. Basically, you could find rocks in all of these colors. Maybe blue would be the hardest to find here, but that said, I think generally it's a pretty good model overall. It's decently tall, actually it's fairly tall, given the parts that are used to make it, and even has a bit of depth to the model as well. I think it's really helpful to use this piece here towards the center of the torso, not only to really close up some of that unsightly gap that is there, because these models can be a bit gappy, but also because it helps to just sort of flush out the front of the model as well, and just make it look overall thicker. Looking at it from around the back end here, you see we got these teeth on the back, which could be used, I guess, to grab something, a third Krana, I don't know. But it's definitely interesting, the use of those parts. And you'll also see I actually moved an axle up here. So normally on the weapons for this one and the green, white, and blue combination, one of the weapons has a longer axle than the other, which I don't like. It's not necessary. All of these are using axles up here, so I just put it through the center, move that axle out here, and I did generally make some changes to these models, but very few for the 2002 models. I'll talk about that as well. So in terms of functionality, definitely interesting that it just keeps the Borak function. Essentially, it just keeps the entire Borak body in here, so not doing anything super revolutionary there. But the fact that they were able to do that and not use up those pieces while still getting something this large is pretty impressive, and I have to commend them for that. Stability-wise, it's a fairly stable model. I haven't had any issues with it falling over or collapsing, and that's including the fact that these brown feet pieces that I'm using here both have cracks in them. Brown seems to be one of those colors that doesn't hold up quite as well as the others. Obviously, I have plenty more without cracks, but even so, works out well enough here to hold itself in place, and I'm quite happy with that. Weapon-wise, just the single weapon on each side, nothing fancy going on there. And interestingly, they use the other weapons as like sort of shoulder armor or to bulk up the arms and somewhat hide that orange color in there as well, which I think works out really well. Obviously, the orange goes with red, the orange goes with brown, and it goes with black, but the fact that it's kind of hidden from the front makes it like a treat to see it, So I think overall this is a pretty good one, but let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is green, white, and blue. No, I don't know the names of these guys. That said, functionality-wise is going to be the same, just to get that right out of the way. And again, you can see I have replaced this axle so that the arms both have 3-length axles in their connection. Very strange of LEGO to not do that, but whatever. Point being, though, again, you can see that we have a Krana down here as well. Kind of interesting that they're blue on both cases. I don't know if there's a reason for that, but it works out well enough here. And that said, in terms of color scheme, a lot more flashy, but again, a very nostalgic color scheme for me. And I think overall, it's a pretty good model. It does have the Krana up here as well in the actual head. And in terms of the teeth, it actually uses them on the sides this time here instead of on the back of the model. Overall, this model is definitely shaped up a bit different from the last one. Obviously, it's quite a bit shorter, and we'll do a size comparison here in a moment, but the Borak's body seems to sort of stick out a little bit more, giving it a bit of a hunched appearance, which I think is quite cool overall, and definitely reminiscent of characters like Pohatu and, of course, Onua as well. Shoulder pads, it gets these little windscreen pieces on there as well, so I think overall that works out. And weapons, it actually gets 2 weapons on each side rather than 1. Uses black quite a bit more heavily here, or at least more of a prominent inclusion of black here, almost making it like a 4th color, which I think is definitely a choice, but it's a good choice. It's obviously a neutral, it works out well enough, and I think overall the model is pretty good. I really recommend building this one, if only to see how they build the body comparatively to the previous one as well, because this one obviously opts for width. It is a wider model at the sacrifice of height, and so to see that height difference, it is about an 8 length axle, 6 to 8 length axle shorter, which I find interesting. And it does that in a couple of ways. Obviously, notably, the body orientation here being off to the sides, but it also moves the entire assembly down by 2 modules as well. So overall, the whole thing just kind of sinks into itself a bit more. In terms of the length of the arms, I think they're about the same because these lift arms and the body of the Borak pieces are roughly the same length, little different, but connection-wise, it works out well here. But again, because this model is so much shorter, these feel longer because they go down to nearly where the knees are, whereas on this model, they go down to about where the hips start. Same leg build for both of these, so you're not going to have any issues with stability here either, with the exception, of course, of these axles being used, the 5-length axles, at the base here, rather than in the body of the model. Let's go ahead and move on to Borak Cal now, and I'm going to start with probably what is my least favorite, and it's definitely the one that I've modified the most. When I say modify, I'm talking about using pieces within the sets that were left over. So there are no extraneous pieces here, no extra pieces from my collection. This is still using pieces from the Borak Cal, like these windscreens on the sides here. Why not add them? You know, they're left over, no reason not to. You've got, obviously, the Tanakh shields left over, so why not add those? And one of my biggest gripes with this model specifically, I've got 2, is, I want to say stability. Because this model does not actually use the chrono holders on its feet normally, and these silver sockets, at least from my experience, tend to have a little less friction overall, meaning this model is pretty top heavy. It likes to kind of fall over forward or backward either way. Functionally, it of course still has that Borak body built in, so it's still going to work there, but it also has the fists, which can also punch out as well. There is definitely a sacrifice to that, though, in that they don't have a lot of like forward maneuverability. You can move them up and down quite a bit, but you can't really get a lot of forward and backward motion out of them, which I think is a bit unfortunate. But again, I mean, you've got a decent amount of movement there. In the model itself, they also do a brown body on one side, black body on the other. I just, decided to again make it symmetric because there's no reason not to. Obviously, you're breaking down these builds anyway to rebuild them, so why not go the extra mile? But I think in part that's just saving some, I was going to say, some pages in the instructions, but I don't even think that's the case, right? Generally speaking, beefed up in other ways, obviously adding the extra pair of Borak feet to the side here to really armor out the front as well, make the character look wider overall, and that's also to help kind of block out these pretty unsightly gaps on the sides here as well. From the front, they're a little bit harder to see. They hide a little better behind those silver feet. Not perfect by any means, but it works well enough. And the other gripe that I have with this is it's just not that exciting compared to the other 3. It doesn't do a whole lot that the other 3 do not do, right? So generally speaking, I think this one's a lot of fun if you want to like just hammer at things like over and over again, since you've got the 2 arms that can just sit there and smash at stuff, right? But at the same time, the build here is basically just a slightly modified Borak build times 3. So you're taking apart all 3 Borak to basically just put them right back together as they are. Yes, there are differences, but there's not that many. That said, I did put a Krana in it, but it does not instruct you to put a Krana in it. And I think that's intentional because the second model, which we're going to look at right now, and probably my favorite of all of these, or at least of the Borak Cal, is this one right here. Again, slightly modified, notably the arms. This is basically, to me, just make the Borak again, but bigger. And I think that that's pretty cool. Overall, it has some of the recognizable stuff that the Borak have, right? Those slightly like rounded feet overall, the rounded body shape in general, right? The arms, which on the original version are not quite this long because they do not use these green body pieces here. But I did because, again, this leaves behind quite a few extra pieces. In fact, it uses very little of the green pieces in general. On top of that, obviously adding the double weapons on here as well, because otherwise, if you were to build these official, you would take this entire assembly off and then just take off one of the shields and put it here, leaving the arms fairly short overall. In terms of functionality, though, this guy throws his entire top at you. Now, I have made it so that it returns on its own. However, in the official instructions, that is not what happens. In the official instructions, when you push the model forward, it locks in that forward position because the rubber bands pull either backward or forward, not dead center. But because it's like this, it will return on its own, given if you have a good enough rubber band, obviously. That said, in terms of the rest of the build, though, pretty much straightforward, but there is one more change that I think is important, and that is the addition of the Krana on the inside here. That is facilitated thanks in part to the limb that I added on the inside there as well, which just helps to kind of align the Krana properly, and then of course the rubber band that holds this closed anyway, if you're going to use it, might as well hold something in there. Clearly it's not an illegal technique, you did it the year before. But generally speaking, I think this is overall a pretty cool model. That said, both of the cowl models are very short overall. This has actually got a little bit of a bias to it because I leaned it forward, so it's a little bit taller right now. But if I compare that to the tallest from the Borak from the year before, you can see the size difference. It's honestly not even, it's night and day, for real. And even if I compare it with the green, white, and blue from the year before as well, yeah, like, it's still nearly half the size, maybe a little bit over half. It's incredible the difference between these. But I think overall, these are pretty good sets to have to build. And obviously, there are a lot of people who have built their own combination models, their own separate, unique versions of these. I plan to do so as well. And I would recommend checking those out as, too. The last thing I want to say before I went ahead and ended this video is in the instructions, there is a very slight error, and that is with this windscreen specifically. It uses this windscreen twice, but it does color it differently for the second one. It's very weird, but in the instructions it appears kind of a cyan color, but it is this print, so I hope somebody got fired for that blunder. And that's basically it for this one. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, helps the channel out, and of course, as always, you can check out links for Instagram, Discord, and Patreon, all of which are down in the description below, and I guess I'll be posting these builds over there hopefully later today if it doesn't start raining. All right, take care.